is on behalf of the Association of Muslim Project Managers. This session will be recorded, so please make sure that's okay with you. If not, we would have to politely ask you to leave, unfortunately, but it won't be shared without any prior consent or anything, so it's mainly to be viewed. I'm Walid. I'll be hosting these sessions. I'd like to thank Raja for giving me the platform as the lead for the AMPM, so thank you very much. Um, it's a relatively small group of us. We'll just if anyone would like to introduce themselves, you're not forced to. Just please raise your hand, and it would be good just learn a little bit more about everyone. If there's anyone that would like to, please do so now.
While we wait for people, I'll go ahead. So my name is Raja. I work for Mark McDonald, and I am also the lead for the Association of Muslim Project Managers. Mina Hassan, do you want to go ahead? You've got your camera on.
Hi, yeah, I'm Mina. I just completed my commission with SCS Railways. Probably joining another commission with Heathrow Airport. I'm basically a senior QS.
Amazing.
Nice to have you here, Mina.
Right, should we make a start? I don't see any other hands up.
Let's make a start. So, yeah. So those that are familiar with this webinar series, it's on program today. There will be a dedicated Q&A session at the end, but if it's related to what you see on the screen, please ask away. Yeah. So hopefully we could have a little bit of a discussion going. It would be good to understand everyone's perspectives on program, what they've successfully done, what they agree, disagree with, etc. Let's move on. Just a little bit about me. I've got a bachelor's and master's in civil engineering. I'm a chartered project professional with the APM, and I'm an NEC4 ECC project manager accreditation. Most importantly, 15 plus years working with NEC contracts as a whole. So hopefully, I know a thing or two about NEC contracts, and I will be able to assist. This is session 3 out of 5 so far. So if you missed the ones on contract strategy or introduction to NEC, just get in touch. We can share the slides or the recordings with you. They were great sessions, so it would definitely be great for you to catch up at some point on those. But worry not, the best is yet to come. Payment, defined cost, compensation events, the juicy bits. We'll be getting onto those in the following month session. But before we get onto that, we've got program which is critical to NEC. So for those that are familiar with NEC contracts, you'll know that program relates to a schedule. For those that are planning professionals or have worked with other contracts, you could think of it as a Gantt chart plus information. What that means is NEC has additional information required by a program. Many NEC practitioners refer to a program as the heartbeat of the contract itself, because that is something you're constantly looking at. Where are we? What part are we on? What's coming next? How long do we have left? Can we delay this? How will it affect our critical path, etc.? If I just said a bunch of things, the terminology, if I just used a bunch of terminology that you don't understand, don't worry, we will go through it very shortly. As you can see, the information in the red, let's see if my highlighter works. Doesn't always work, but let's see. That's for any changes in NEC4. So in case you're seeing double language there, it's just so we're all familiar with the terminology being used. I'll try to make this motivational and inspirational, but let's see. So you can learn from the past, you can only manage the future, program is key. I think that needs a bit of refinement. But anyways, what I'm trying to get at is that the contract is absolutely essential, and it shows you the technical requirements for any contract. So we've established that the program is important. It gives us a plan to work towards. For those that are in the world of project management as a whole, you'll be very familiar with contracts. For those that are quantity surveyors, there's applications to it as well. So although you may not be directly involved in that, there can be financial consequences for your organization for not providing a program, which we'll cover into in a second. So 63.3 or 63.45, that is a critical clause within the NEC contract. I'll read it out very slowly just so you can comprehend the implications it has. A delay to the completion date is assessed as the length of the time due to the compensation when planned completion is later than planned completion as shown on the accepted program current at the deadline date. Again, a lot of NEC terminology, we'll just break it down. Completion date is the contractual completion date when the contract requires you to be done by, which is different from a planned completion. That's when the contractor thinks they'll be done by. This may be before or after the contractual completion date. We can call it that, for instance. But there will be, if they are delayed for that, there may be delay damages, for instance. But that's a story for another time. What this clause tells us is that if you have a compensation event in NEC language, very similar to a variation or a change, NEC doesn't use those words, it just uses compensation event. But if I say that, think of it as a variation or change, just for familiarity. If this affects your critical path and your planned completion is delayed, your contractual completion date is delayed by the same amount. If your planned completion is delayed by 2 weeks, you have to push back your contractual completion date. The reason why this is important is because there will be delay damages associated with this and other implications such as takeover, completion, the defect state, for instance. So it's very critical we establish that at the start. More importantly, if we don't have a program, we don't have a way of managing the completion date is when completion is required, which we've covered shortly. So NEC places a huge emphasis on accepting the program. You hear a lot about old school project managers saying, "Oh, I've been working in this industry for 20 years. I've never accepted a program." That's because you're probably reading the contract wrong. If you accept something, does not mean you're approving something. It's very different, two distinctly different terms. The contractor, what we will cover in a second, it shows us that that's just the plan on where they are. If you don't like that they're delayed, not accepting it isn't going to change that. You're not approving it. That's a completely separate mechanism. It just shows you a realistic timestamp of where they are. Just going through the slides, so we can ask for a program at the tender stage, or we can ask for it within the interval stated within the contract day, or in other words, once you get into contract. What the last bullet point there says, the first program accepted has no special status because NEC does this thing where it uses the last accepted program. If you have a new program, the original one almost becomes obsolete or irrelevant at that stage. You don't even need to look at it because once we have compensation events, so if there are any changes, we're going to look at the last accepted program. If the contractor submits a program and we don't accept it for a reason stated within the contract, not because we don't like it, that in that case you will revert to the last accepted program, whether that may be to say if your last accepted program was in March, we're now in August, you've now had 2-3 months of not accepted programs, will revert to the last accepted program. So again, the text in the red that just emphasizes that point a little more. Just before we move on, I'd be interested to gauge just the familiar experience level of the group. Has anyone had experience working as an NEC project manager or accepting programs or even reviewing programs? You might even be a planner. If so, it'd be great just to get your thoughts on the process.
Yeah, Tarek, as a QS, I don't like manage the program, but to assess the compensation events, that's I face a little bit trouble.
Yeah.
For example, the accepted program is not like we are accepting the delay. That's the logic. Sometimes you get different views, and also um, to assess the compensation events when something delay happened. That's a critical bit for us.
Exactly. So you hit the nail on the head. Mind if I ask, do you work as a QS for the client side or the contractor side?
Contractor side.
Okay, absolutely. So that's absolutely critical. As you mentioned, first thing would be to say if an activity is taking 3 weeks, the client will challenge you on whether this 3 weeks is a critical path activity, whether it can be done concurrently with other activities, in which case the contractor would not be entitled to a delay. And this goes on to jumping the gun a bit. This will lead into defined cost compensation events, how they're assessed as well. So hopefully, I won't go into on that about too much today. But as a QS, then I think the next critical sessions will be absolutely vital in assessing those correctly. Okay, let's move on. So the contractor has obligations under the contract for the program. On the program, they'll have an access date. They do not start work before this access date. That's when they're legally obliged or contractually obliged, per se, to start work. So if they don't have their access date on their program, the project manager may not accept it because it's against the contract. The contractor needs to do the work so that completion is on or before the completion date. As we briefly covered earlier, completion date is different from planned completion. Planned completion can be whatever the hell you want it to be. That is just shows your realistic time stamp of the contractor's plans on where they are. But the reason why completion date is important because there are the penalties associated with that and other contractual implications. There's also, this is why people love NEC. There's also another term which is completion, which is different from completion, which is different from completion date and planned completion. This is a state. It's not a date within the program. This is when the project manager certifies completion. There's a definition for that, but that's not the purpose of today. But that may also be shown on the program on when they plan on doing it, or once you're done, that'll be a separate complete date. So we've covered some of the contractor's obligations. Let's look at what the client has to do. This is quite interesting, and as I'm sure people who have worked as a client side can quite relate to this. If the contractor, if there's a client obligation for the contractor to fulfill, such as we need to go to this plot of land, we need to cut the grass or cut the trees, whatever, and it's a client obligation. So if the client needs to give you access to it, if they need to open the gate for you, the contractor can't just say, "Oh, okay, yeah, can you do that tomorrow for us?" That would be kind of nice. That's incorrect. You do not do that. What you do is as the contractor, you put it on your program for acceptance. Okay, we need access to the gate in 3 weeks' time. Project manager accepts it, providing it's practicable. He can do that, not so that okay, the access date is in the past, which is completely wrong, or it's in 2 days from now, and the project manager needs 2 weeks to liaise with the landowner, for instance. So access, we will agree it with the client. And what these say is that to summarize these 3 bullet points, if there's a client obligation and they do not fulfill it and it's within the accepted program, the contractors will love this. Bingo, they get a compensation event. Say if you see say we're now in March, you say you need access to this gate in August, for instance. It's now August. Their client accepted this. They don't give you access. You get a compensation and you get more time and money. You still have to justify your costs, give a quotation to prove that you have actually incurred costs. It's not a blank checkbook, but it does open up that gate. So as a client, this is fundamental. When I'm reviewing contracts, this is the first thing I look at. I make a note of all the client obligations there are, or see whether they're practicable in accordance with the contract. For instance, if my works information or scope says I need 3 weeks to review a document and they're asking for access within, I don't know, half a week, I can reject that based on it not being practicable. However, if I know I can just do it and I've got the keys myself, I may still accept it anyway. So there does need to be an element of practicality to it. So the what you may see in the blue text is others is also a client obligation unless specifically stated. So others may be third-party utility suppliers, other contractors that our main contractor needs to work with. So those are all client obligations, and that'll be in your accepted program. If they don't work to what's in the accepted program, what can happen there is that the contractors may still get a compensation rent. So this is the most fundamental things you should look out for in a program, apart from the other everyday stuff. So this is going to be quite interesting. So for those that are unfamiliar with NEC, please bear with me. Ask questions if nothing makes sense because it can seem a little intimidating at first. Within your program, you're going to have many different dates. Your first one's going to be your contract date. That's when the contract came into existence. Starting date is when your contractor plans to start the works, and this will also be linked to the other risks and the insurances that the contractor needs to take in. Access dates, this is when you'll start the work. You'll put this in your program. As we've covered earlier, completion, different from planned completion date and completion date. Completion is the state is when the project manager certifies completion. It's when the definition of completion has been met. So your completion date, which is not capitalized, this is another term. So in terms of understanding NEC, this is probably as complicated as it gets. So once you understand all these dates, like you'll be on the road, you'll be unstoppable. So your completion date, which isn't capitalized, that'll be in your contract data. So for those that were here in the last session, we covered contract data, what's in it and what's not, and you would have seen that it includes completion date. This will be populated at the start, at the tender stage. This is when you think, whether it's in part one, that's when if it's in part one, the client feels it, so the client would want it done by then the contractor would take this into account as part of their tender returns. If it's in part two, this is when if it's left open, for instance, this is when the contractor intends on getting it done, and they may also submit a program which shows this being done by then. Completion date in capitalized now, and it wasn't capitalized before, so this is the contractual completion date. You are legally, contractually obliged to be done by then, apart from compensation events, acceleration, or acceptance of a defect. Apart from those three mechanisms, you cannot change this date whatsoever. It is impossible. Well, you can, but you won't. You won't be in accordance with the contract. This is also the date that delay damages are associated to. You'll hear about it a lot, especially in high-level senior management discussions when contract negotiations. They'll be negotiating delay damages. Say if you negotiate at £5,000 a day, you miss this date, you'll be charged at £5,000 per day. So this is the key date that clients and contractors will be looking out for. Planned completion, we don't need to go into too much of it. This doesn't really mean too much in the grand scheme of things. It's just the contractors plan when they think they'll be done. There's no sort of penalties associated with this date. So here's another term, date on completion. This is when the project manager states completion is achieved the state. That'll be a date in it within, that's another term within the NEC. So you may have another 2 weeks from there. Then the reason why it's 2 weeks, the client is obliged to take over the works. The building is done. Standard wording is you've got 2 weeks to take over it and from the works. And then your insurances and your risk transfers to the client as well. So yet another date, but do bear with me because this is only as complicated as it gets. NEC is pretty straightforward after this. You've got a defect date. This is typically 12 months after your completion date. So you'll then have a defects period where you've got where if you notify a defect, for instance, you'll the contractor will still be obliged to correct it if they find out with it if it's notified within the defects correction period. There are also other terms like latent defects, for instance, that they're not NEC terms. Those are like defects discovered after years and years and years. That's not an NEC term, but I have seen this being amended to include it. Uh, you've also got key dates, which are included in your program. Those are when conditions need to be met, which are important for the client. For instance, I'm making a building and I need the foundations to go in by June, for instance. If not, I may associate delay damages and sectional completion with that, but that's a topic for another time. Let's move on. So as we covered earlier, the completion date capitalized, this is the biggest date there is. This is essential to understanding NEC contracts. The only three reasons that this can be moved. The contractor cannot move it because the supplier didn't turn up, or because of inflation, or the concrete driver had a burst tire. This does not move, period. Apart from three reasons. If it's a compensation event, that's then the client can have more time, more money. Acceleration. We originally agreed it's going to be done in October. However, due to external circumstances, we want it done in September, for instance. Give me a quotation for getting it done 1 month quicker. This isn't your fault. So if you do accelerate, then we can move the completion date. If there is the last one is a bit nuanced. If there is a defect that prevents completion, and you say, for instance, okay, my scope of works information said green doors, and you've given me red doors. That's clearly a defect. However, I kind of like green doors, so I don't really have a problem with it. But it's still a defect as defined in the contract, so I may just decide to accept it. However, I want a reduction in time and money for it. So that way completion date can be changed. But it happens, but it is not always common. Aziz, you've got your hand up?
Thank you, Walid. Yeah, no, this is super insightful. The can the completion date in an NEC also be affected like by force majeure, so unforeseeable events? Because we've noted that as well in some of the projects that we're looking at. It would be good to get your insight on that.
Absolutely. So it's a very good question, but there is a simple answer for it because force majeure within the contract, it's one of the compensation events listed. So your contractor gets a compensation event. If that force majeure, for instance, if it was COVID, or I don't know if there was a hurricane that took out half of London, God forbid, but that would be a force majeure event, and you'll get an extension to your completion date. I hope that answered it.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. If you want to, I'm not sure what it is you do, but if you want to go into more detail, I'm happy for you to contact me separately, and we can have a detailed discussion on it.
Thank you.
No problem. Cool. Let's move on. This is another key fundamental difference. So there's often a terminology associated around with NEC contracts called negative compensation events. Okay, as a client, my scope was to do a building and to do a car park with it. That's what the contractor has to do. Okay, halfway through the project, I decide that I don't want the car park anymore, but you was originally obliged to do it. Or that's within your price, your activity schedule, whatever payment mechanism it is. So I'm going to give you an instruction to remove this car park. It's still a compensation event. as defined in the contract because it's an instruction to change the works information. There are many compensation events, but that's one of the main ones. So you're given instructions to remove the car park. You'll then expect to see a reduction in prices. So okay, you want at least some of your money back. There may be design time associated with that. You can have that, but you haven't actually started building it. So I want a bit of my money back, or at least an agreement that we won't pay you. So what happens then is that your contractor will submit a quotation. If a client isn't experienced with NEC, he'll be like, okay, why hasn't my completion date moved? Because that car park was going to take you another 2 months. I want that reflected in your program. This is where everyone goes wrong. In the terminology within the contract, it says compensation events can only delay. So it's still an instruction. You may see it as a negative compensation event. It can only delay completion date. Remember I said planned completion could be whatever? So your planned completion for your contractor will be brought forward, but your completion date will stay the same. Because as we've established, the completion date can only be moved from these three events. If it's a compensation event, other than that, acceleration or acceptance of a defect. It took me a while to learn, but I think it's quite important to hammer home. So we'll just cover some of the Aziz.
Thank you, Walid. So when we say completion date, anything impacting it, is that just purely critical path, the longest sequence of works to the completion? Or is it?
Correct, yes.
So if it's an event that actually doesn't impact or after assessment, then we can't. Can it be a compensation event in your experience, or?
Yes, that's right. So a compensation event, to say if we're talking about, I don't know, unforeseen ground conditions, changes to the scope, most common reasons, there are many different other ones. Some that we covered before as well, such as the client not working or giving you access to that gate, for instance, that we spoke about in the accepted program. It is a compensation event because the contract says it is. There are no ifs or buts. But what I think you're referring to is that the assessment of it. So if you just go back a few slides. If you look at this clause here, a delay to the completion date is assessed as the length of time that due to the compensation when planned completion is later than planned completion, as shown on the accepted program. So if it doesn't affect your critical path, if it's not impacting the last activity, or if other activities are dependent on it, it will not impact your completion date. It's as simple as that. However, if my car park, for instance, could only be done after the building was being made and it couldn't be done concurrently, that would be critical path. Does that explain it?
That's great. Thank you.
No problem. Questions are great. It gives me reinforcement that I'm not talking to myself. Roger.
Just a quick one, and I think this might, if you go back to the clause where the word completion date is repeated, I just wanted to go back on, I guess, one of the initial conversations that we would have had on this webinar, but just to revisit that, the NEC contract, it might sound a bit abysmal if you read it, because it says the planned completion is later than the planned completion as shown on the accepted program. So I guess one of the things that you need to understand here as well is that there are defined terms within the NEC contract. So if you look at the NEC contract, the first core clauses under general, there are some defined terms, and some of those terms are in italics, and some of them are in normal text. So a lot of the clauses throughout the contract, throughout the NEC contract, have a lot of those defined terms as defined under the contract, just weaved through the whole contract. So if there is an instance where it's a defined term, you'll be able to look at those italics and go back to the general section and understand what is that defined term. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to bring it back with that perspective as well. But while I've got the microphone, another question for you, Walid, before anyone else asks you this question. generally around compensation events, there is usually a term used, or phrase used around contracts saying the program is at large or time is at large. Are you planning on discussing that later on, or is that a good time to talk about that?
No, it's a very good point. Because I think what you're referring to is the impact of it, and it's critical to establish the difference, as Aziz highlighted as well, the difference between it impacting your completion date, but if it's a critical path activity, and whether it can be within, whether it can be done in concurrently with other activities. So, say for instance, if you're putting windows on your building, for instance, you could probably do the paint around the same time. You don't need to wait until those are done. If Mr. Contractor comes along and tells me that, okay, we can't do that until the end, I'd probably question it, because I know that it can be done. So if it can be done and if it's not impacting your completion date, then obviously then you don't get an extension in time. There may still be an extension in costs, for instance. So it's understanding where you are with your program, understanding the float with it. That's another term we'll cover soon as well. So there'll be float within every activity. There will also be something called time risk allowances. It's the easiest way I understand that is the difference between best productivity and worst productivity is how much time risk are you giving yourself. Okay, if we're really efficient, we can do all the windows in the building within 2 weeks. Okay, say for whatever reason there's a delay with our suppliers or whatever, and we're really bad at it. Some of our work crew doesn't turn up because they're pissed the night before. Let's give ourselves, instead of 2 weeks, let's give ourselves 1 week to float or time risk. So it's just giving us another week there. So in your program, I would expect to see that 1 week as listed as a time risk. As a project manager, I wouldn't bat an eyelid. I wouldn't reject that because it shows me that the program is realistic, that you've considered everything. Hopefully that quick covers it. Okay, let's we covered a lot of these things already. So the contract needs to show the planned operations, the order and timings of the work. If you tell me that the windows are going up before the foundations of the building, I'll probably question that, or the windows going to be floating in the air. So I'd reject that based on it not being realistic. And provisions for float time risk allowances, which we just briefly covered as well. We've covered access. If there's an acceptance, if there's a contractor's design that needs acceptance by the project manager, that will be within your program. I've worked with contractors for better or for worse, asking, saying, oh, you haven't accepted our contractor's design yet. You only gave it to me 2 days ago. My scope says I need 2 weeks, for instance, because I need so I need this and this person to review it. So if the contractor needs you to do something, needs to be in the program, that's the only way that the contract is measured. If it's within the program, you as a client, because you're lazy or for whatever reason don't get it done and it's accepted, they get a compensation event. So this is what makes the NEC brilliant, in my opinion. They need to include a statement of how the contractor plans to do the work. So it shows me that they understand what they're doing. They haven't just gotten a technician or a junior member of staff to put this together overnight. And if my scope says in your program, for instance, if I want it in a certain format, common sense would probably tell you to use a Microsoft Project or Primavera, but that's not surprisingly, that's not an NEC requirement. So what I recommend to clients is to include it within the scope, to have it within Primavera or Microsoft Project, one that you're familiar with, that allows you to do all of this. You may just get on a piece of paper because or Microsoft Word or Excel, for instance, which has happened to me many times. They're not wrong. Contractor isn't wrong to do that because it meets the requirements of the contract, but it's probably not best practice. So you could state in your scope, give me a damn program that is in a program that I understand. So it's probably going to look like a Gantt chart, something like that. One thing I would highlight is that the NEC is very prescriptive about the requirements within the program itself. So it will tell you everything that you need in a program. If you don't have it, you've got grounds to reject it. I've worked for 15 years, and it would be good to get other people's thoughts on this as well. And I've yet to get a program that gives me time risk allowances for all the activities, that gives me flow easily listed, and that gives me a statement on how they want to do the works and the equipment. My point is, there will always be a reason to reject the program, but it doesn't really benefit anyone in that case. So then how do I assess compensation events? I've got no way to go. If I'm assessing a compensation event in October and I have rejected the last 6 programs from, say, March or something, that's more work for me because now I need to update the program until October. So so you do need to be a little practical on this and understand when you can accept it and when you shouldn't. If anyone wants to chip in on that, that would be great. I'm just going to drink water.
Right, while the lead takes a sip of water, I would chip in there. I'm not sure whether Lee is going to cover it later on, but I think I'm a bit of a fanboy when it comes to NEC contracts because they're quite a succinct document, but at the same time, it keeps the powers of the ECC project management in check, project manager in check as well. So while there might be a number of reasons under the contract for which the project manager can reject or cannot accept or will not accept the contractor's program, or as a lot of people call it within the industry, the clause 32 submission, because it is submitted under the clause 32 of the contract. There are 4 reasons, and only those 4 reasons which the contract with the ECCPM need to put forward, and those 4 reasons for not accepting the program are mentioned in the contract. It cannot be any reasons other than those. So that is something to keep in mind. I've been making a list of things, practical tips and tricks, which I will refer to as the end, but I won't interrupt the lead. Back to you.
No, thank you. That's a very good point. For a client I'm working with right now, well, they said, oh, okay, well, they're delayed here. But that doesn't give me too much information. Okay, I don't think I'll get that done in time. If it's not one of the 4 reasons stated within the contract, you cannot reject it. If you do, they get a compensation event. I'd love to be able to pick up the contract and show you right now, but I am conscious of time. I've got 19 minutes left for your precious attention, but we'll cover it in the next session, I promise. For now, just take my word for it. So there's only one accepted program in place that should have your critical path, a narrative, resources, design program. You can ask for whatever you want in it. So there shouldn't be 2 different reference points. But what can happen is especially if you're working with a tier 1 contract, especially the good ones or the ones that are well resourced anyway, they may give you a weekly look ahead schedule. That isn't the contractual program, but it's probably good to look at. It's good to understand. But if it's not in the contract, you cannot ask them for a weekly look ahead schedule unless it's in your scope. So that's a key difference, understanding that there's only one NEC program in place, one accepted program in place. Again, that's my attempt at a fancy graphic. It just shows you it's all in the program. So time risk allowances, we covered it briefly. Again, if I say that they add a week on just because, say, if they're working outdoors, for instance, for bad weather, it shows me that it's realistic, which I'll probably be happy to see. That's a key point there. Time risk allowances are owned by the contractor. They have to show it because it's realistic. I cannot say, okay, you've given yourself 1 week on a 3-week activity. You made it 4 weeks. Oh, I can get Bob from down the road to get it done in 2.5 weeks. If they can explain that it's quite realistic, I don't have grounds to reject it. And this is owned by the contractor. What that means is that if they get a compensation event, say it's a client's fault, for instance, I cannot, when I'm assessing it, I cannot look at the program. Oh, okay. You've given yourself 4 weeks there. Oh, I can probably get it done in 2.5 weeks. I cannot tap into that. That belongs to the contractor. So it's a key difference there. Just whilst we're on that, another thing worth highlighting is this is different from float. Float means that there's a bit of gap or space between a program. If there's a compensation event, I can use float, for instance. Float belongs to whoever gets there first. Say if the contractor is delayed, the supplier doesn't turn up, or again, the concrete lorry has an off day, wherever. It won't be a compensation event because it's not the contract. In simple terms, it's not the client's fault per se. But if it's a contractor's delay, they can still use that float. And then if there's a compensation event and there's still float within each activity, I can still use that. However, key difference, which is I really need to hammer home, is that say within your concrete pouring sequence, you've got 2 days of float there. The concrete lorry doesn't turn up, and you saw the contractor's delays has used up that float. Then the client also gets a compensation event there. Because the float belongs to whoever gets there first, they will not. Then that compensation event will affect your completion date if it is critical path. So that's a subtle difference to understand. But it's key. Again, just some tips on accepting the program. We need to make sure it's realistic. So time risk allowances, I'll be happy to see that because it's realistic. There's some tips on accepting that. So key provision there, if you, as part of your tender return, ask for a program to be submitted with it, this clause wouldn't apply. However, I'll just read it word for word. 25% of the price work done to date, NEC loves acronyms, retained until contractor has submitted the first program. So this, because we've hammered home how important program is, this is a clear financial penalty for the contractor not submitting a program. They submit an application for program for payment, and there isn't a program in place. The client can withhold 25% of the payment. You may be thinking NEC is about mutual trust and cooperation. Is that very collaborative? Probably not. You could argue about whose fault is it. The contractor should have submitted a program, but that's a clear financial penalty on until we have a program in place, which really hammers home how important it is. Again, as I briefly covered earlier, especially those that are quite old school, what you may get is that the old school project manager saying, I've been in this industry for 20 years, I've never accepted a program and I never will. They probably won't do the last part, but anyways. So it's a key difference. As a project manager, we are accepting, we are not approving anything. Approving means taking responsibility. You are not liable for anything for accepting unless it's a client obligation, as we covered earlier, as for access or others working, such as utility providers. So you're not really putting yourself up to risk by accepting a program. All you need to do is make sure the access dates are realistic and practicable. You can meet those. Other than that, you can't really be penalized for it as a client. So you should be looking to accept programs. As I mentioned before as well, you cannot assess a compensation event if there's not a program in place. Say if you reject the past 6 program submissions, you get a compensation event. You've just given yourself 6 months worth of program updating to do because you didn't accept any previous program submissions. So as Raja was mentioning earlier, the Clause 32 program, the Clause 31 program, key difference, probably give too much detail. That's your first program submission. Clause 32 is revising it. You need to, whatever your program interval is within your contract data, it's typically 4 weeks, not in all projects. I'm recently working on a project where it's 2 weeks. The contractor needs to submit a program every 2 weeks for acceptance. So that's what that means, interval stated in contract AR. We can also use it if there's a compensation event. We can ask for a program to go alongside with it if the program's changed, if there's a program impact with it. So program is used many times within the NEC. Just going to skip through the next few, just a bit conscious on time. If you got 2 weeks to accept a program, accept it straight away because there could be a CE. Again, that's more work for you as a project manager. We don't want to make lives harder for ourselves. So to accept it, you'll review it, all the obligations that we mentioned, the contractors, subcontractors, whether it's realistic, they'll submit it, and then you'll accept it by writing. NEC requires communications to be done in writing and independently from each other. So you can't give yourself, Mr. Contractor, a compensation event for the windows, for instance, and be like at the end of it, by the way, I accept your last program as well. It doesn't work that way. You need to reference the clauses and keep it separate from other communications. For better or for worse, that's how NEC is. Some like it, some don't. I think it's great. These are just some information about starting and stopping the works. This needs to be shown on the program. We'll cover compensation events in a few sessions time, so we won't go into too much information today. For takeover, if the work is completed, I, Mr. Project Manager, inspect the works after the contractor says it's done. Okay, I like the building. If it's not a defect that prevents completion, if it's in some words a minor defect, that's not an NEC term, but it's probably a common sense term, is that okay, or I can still accept it because it's not preventing me from taking over the works. I can still use the building. Say if it's a blemish in the paint, that'll still be a defect. The contractor still needs to correct it, but that's not stopping me from taking over the works. That's what takeover is. Acceleration we covered earlier. It's not your fault. I want it done earlier. Give me a quote to get it done earlier. Get it done 2 months in advance, and that's one of the only ways we can move the completion date, not the planned completion. We covered that key clause already. To assess compensation events, if it delays your planned completion, your completion date is delayed by the same time. So if the contractor proves that it's a critical path activity and it's delayed then by 2 weeks, 2 months, whatever it is, we have to move the completion date by the same amount of time. So this is how to assess compensation events. You're going to start with the accepted program. Say if there isn't one in place, then you're going to update it to show remaining work. You're going to show the effect of the compensation event and see if there's any delay to planned completion or the completion date. This is very easy to do if your program is 2 weeks or 3 weeks old. If it's 2 or 3 months old, it becomes quite a tedious exercise that I'm sure no one wants to do. So we briefly covered this, but I'll summarize this slide. You've got all your activities in your program. That little bit there, that'll be your time risk allowances. Okay, that's just to say, just in case we're not productive or the best or worst productivity, and just giving us a little bit of a leeway, giving us a bit of extra time. That to me shows that's realistic. You've considered it. Would I reject a program? No, if they don't have that? That's not one of the 4 reasons stated within the contract, so I'd still have to accept it. I can challenge it, I can highlight it, but I cannot reject it based on that. If there are a compensation event, for instance, I now want to, I don't know, I now want a state-of-the-art fire sprinkler system within the building as well, whereas before it was standard spec. Compensation event. If it's not affecting my critical path, it's just time added on. If it was added on to the end of number 3, for instance, that would be a delay to planned completion. So, one term that we haven't covered so far is at the end of between planned completion and completion date. So this little area there. In the NEC world, some people call it the period with no name. There will be a terminal float, for instance. So typically 30 days, but that can change. that belongs to the contractor. You cannot take that. Oh, okay, you gave yourself 30 days of float there. Okay, so if you just do this activity, then our completion date doesn't stay the same. As we've already covered, if it delays the planned completion, we cannot use the float. It belongs to the contractor. If that's delayed by 20 days, this gets pushed out by 20 days. Key dates, is there any specific conditions we want within the program? So this is a key clause in red that I've highlighted. If the PM decides that the work does not meet the conditions stated and the employer incurs additional costs in carrying out work on the same project, the PM assesses this additional cost. Why is this scary? Because if you decide that you're not going to certify completion as a project manager, this clause isn't too collaborative. It says the PM assesses the additional cost, because the reason why it's scary is that it doesn't say it's a compensation event. It doesn't say, because as we'll cover later, peer compensation events are typically assessed as defined cost. There's a set metric for it. This doesn't tell you how it's going to be assessed. The contractor is at large. The client can pursue you for unlimited damages. This is a very key difference to understand for contractors that are out there. So it just goes on to the common theme with NEC contracts: mutual trust and cooperation. Don't piss off your client. Don't piss off your contractor. Work with each other. Then you won't get issues like this. Just a few changes for those that were familiar with NEC 3. The way it was worded was that the project manager did not have to accept a program submission. It could be in project management limbo, for instance, purgatory forever. It will just stay there because it doesn't penalize you for not accepting it. It says, I believe from memory, the contractor may remind the project manager to accept it, but if he still doesn't do anything, nothing happens. In NEC4, it's been changed. So if the project manager does not accept it, I believe after 2 weeks, the contractor may remind you. If the project manager still does not do anything, it has deemed to be accepted. Key difference, but important difference to understand. Summary program is key. Get your program right. Spend time doing it. Don't just go on CV Library, get someone with programming skills, basic programming skills to make yourself an NEC program. You're going to set yourself up for failure. It needs to be someone who understands it well and who is skilled at this sort of thing. If you mess up your program, your project is set up for failure. It's as simple as that. Well, this was going to be a small test where I'd have transitions coming up, but I didn't do that, so you've got the answers already. But we'll share it in the slides as well. This is just so you understand the differences between each date. Completion date required for completion. Planned completion, no financial implications for it when the supplier thinks they'll be done. Completion is when it's a state, not a date. So when the project manager goes along to your building, say, okay, I can take over, that's completion. Your date of completion is when your project manager has actually done it. So again, these are defined terms in the contract, which if I had more time, I'd go through. Thank you very much. Been a pleasure. If there are any questions, would love to hear about people's thoughts on how they found it. If there are any questions, it would be great just to spend a few minutes having a little discussion.
Wait to see any raised hands. Can't. But while I'll let people decide what they want to ask or whether they want to ask a question later on, I just wanted to go over some practical implications of me working on a day-to-day as an ECC PM and what would I do. And I wanted to give that insight of life in a day of a project ECC project manager, accepting programs or looking at programs. So I think my practical tips and tricks, I'm calling them, with regards to program and the program submissions and resubmissions, what I tend to do is to effectively focus on that collaborative behavior and bringing that collaborative behavior out. So even though it's been plastered all over the NEC contracts, it's about the ECC PM. If you are that ECC PM, or if you're a client or in any capacity involved within the ECC contract, to to facilitate bringing out those behaviors. And again, it starts with you. Even if you're not a named person under the contract, it starts with you to be able to be able to live those behaviors, if you may, through the contract life cycle. And through that, the way I like to do it personally with my contracts, with the contractor, is that I would just have a collaborative meeting where they present the contract rather than them submitting it on a contract management tool, whether it's CMA, whether it's Fast Draft, whether it's email, whatever has been stipulated. I speak to them, I let them present the program to me, and then if I have any questions, if something's blatantly obviously incorrect, or I've got some questions, I can address those in that meeting. Otherwise, I'll take them away, have a conversation with the site supervisor, have a conversation with the client. If I need to look at other documentation, like if there was a clause 31 submission or a clause 32 submission prior to that, if there has been any compensation events or any clause 62 submissions, which I'm sure we'll touch upon the compensation event section later on in this webinar series. And then also think about if there was a construction program submitted at the time of tender. All of these things, if the client team, as part of their working, do whole life programming for that project. So all of those bits of information should feed into your decision making as the ECC project manager, accepting the program submission by the contractor. Another practical thing that I like to do on TRA, time risk allowance. So obviously, if TRA isn't there, I try and push back and say, well, because you've not considered TRA, I don't think your program's realistic. So I kind of put it under the realistic bit and push it back and say, right, not realistic enough. But what I want to do, what I have seen the contractors do on time risk allowance is that, let's say there's a whole section of work. For instance, there's an area where there is, let's say, X meters of piling or X meters of foundation, or the first floor of a building. They would put a chunk of time as TRA to the whole thing rather than at each individual activity. And there's a positive and a negative. So the positive is that it is less work. The negative is that if the contractor, again, it just depends on how much detail you want to go into. If it is not allocated to one activity, it doesn't really represent that the contractors thought about it in much detail. And then secondly, if they've completed all of it and they've not really allocated anything to the following activity, and all of it was in the first activity, for instance, they will lose it as soon as that one activity is completed. So it's about just understanding that as well. The last thing that I wanted to highlight on the practical side of it, and obviously conscious of time as well, is that you can use different tools. You can use Microsoft Projects, Excel, P6, and then there are clients who do it well, and there are clients who don't do it as well. There's always benefit in a linked up approach between different things in a contract. So, and by that I mean your program. By that I mean your resource loading. By that I mean your forecast to complete. So if those things are talking to each other, it would give a bit of a unified approach and different places where you can check up on information. So yeah, just food for thought. But back to you, Walid.
No, absolutely. It's some very good points you've made, and I'm really glad you shared that. So thank you very much. Especially what you said about the time risk allowances. I unfortunately know that feeling way too well, just having a blob of activity. So just to share a story, I once asked a contractor, okay, there's no time risk allowances here. Okay, can you add in? Yeah, that, well, why do we need to do that? Everything's there. Well, the contract says you need to do follow the flipping contract. Anyways, so then 2 weeks later, I got a return with the one activity at the end, 2 months added on this completely defeats the purpose of it. You are not, this doesn't show me how much time risk allowance you have per activity. It needs to be done per activity. So that is quite important because it does serve a purpose. Cool, brilliant. If there aren't any other further questions or comments, thank you very much, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hope to see you all in the next one. And we'll pick up right where we started on payment and defined cost, which is a very juicy one. And if I may say so myself, my absolute favorite. So thank you very much. Hope to all see you in the next one.
Thank you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Raja, can we